Hey everybody, it is time for Mental Health Matters, the podcast sponsored by St. Louis Counseling. Check us out at stlouiscounseling.org. And this is Tom Duff. I'm the Executive Director of St. Louis Counseling, also a licensed clinical social worker, so I'm a therapist at heart. And actually, I'm becoming a podcaster. You know, I've been doing this for a year now, and now I guess I'm a podcaster as well. And I should also say that Giving Tuesday is coming up. So those of you that are still listening after 30 seconds of the podcast will hear this. Giving Tuesday is coming up about a month from now. If you are interested in donating to a nonprofit, please think of St. Louis Counseling, and please go to our website, stlouiscounseling.org, or reach out directly to Debbie Dugan. That's DDUGAN at ccstl.org. So as always, you know, we're trying to make mental health topics and areas related to mental health okay to talk about around the dinner table, and which helps us break down stigma. So today we have another special guest, and she is going to talk to us a little bit about, well, just life, right? Just life and what struggles of life are sometimes, but
deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts. I like that. And that's going to be Deep Thoughts with Jenny Beatrice. How are you, Jenny?
Good. Good to be here.
Good. I am excited you're here. You know, we have a common acquaintance. Actually, it's Debbie Dugan. You used to teach PSR, Public School Religion, for you non-Catholics out there, with Debbie Dugan back in the day, huh?
We did. We're fearless leaders.
Wow.
In that department.
How many years ago was that? Too many to say?
Let's just not talk about that part.
Okay. Awesome. So, you know, in your daytime job, right? So you're the communications director at Sisters of St. Joseph of Cardonelet.
Yes, Cardonelet.
So, Cardonelet. Mm-hmm. Cardonelet sounds just kind of fancier to me.
Well, French. Yeah.
French, yeah. French is fancy, right?
It is.
I don't know. Fancy. Speaking of fancy, you're from Jersey, aren't you?
I'm from Jersey. I'm glad you connected that with fancy. That's not always what I get.
How long you been in St. Louis?
About 20 years.
Oh, so you're maybe not, you don't have that thick accent anymore, do you?
No, when I first got here, everybody said I spoke too fast. And I thought you all spoke too slow. Now I just said y'all. I'm in now.
Oh, you're in. You're in.
It's official.
You're from the boot heel now, probably, right?
Yep.
We love Missouri. We love our dialects. That is true about speaking slow. I've heard that before from people from different coasts, that you guys just kind of speak with a drawl too. And I'm like, this is middle America. We don't have a accent like that, but I guess some people do. A little bit, y'all. So, you know, I think today we'll talk a little bit. You wanted to share a little bit of your story, kind of like just your own struggles at times with mental health, right?
Yeah. And
you've been open about some different diagnoses or bipolar 2 that you cope with when those symptoms come up from time to time. So once again, it's about people like this podcast, right? It's about people sharing a story that others can relate to, and that gives courage to people as well too. So thank you, you know, for your willingness to do that. So I guess one question is, so, you know, bipolar right off the bat, you know, so I think we hear that term a lot in today's media, today's society, you know, and at one time there was manic depressive, it was called that, you know, and so basically if you're listening out there, bipolar, just in general, is some people have these wide range mood swings where you're really up, you're kind of manic, feeling very energized, very just up, hyped, you know, and then there's these other lows where it's very low. And so and from a diagnosis world, you have bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and that's just really, if you're going to break it down really simple, is just different magnitude of some of those swings, or when you're up, you know, just different magnitudes of that. So just those listening as we get started with this, and Jenny shares some of her story, you know, that's kind of what we'll talk about, and I'm sure you'll be able to talk in more detail about that too. So I guess my first question is, like, why were you okay with coming on a podcast with millions and millions of listeners?
Excuse me, I have to go now.
Why were you okay with kind of sharing your story?
Well, I found that when I told someone face to face what I was experiencing, that I had bipolar 2, I didn't explode. They didn't run away screaming. And it was good for me to share it made me feel more confident and better about my relationships with people, that I could be open about what I was going through and that they were still there for me. I also found that when I was talking to people, they would start telling me about their experiences, whether it's their own or a family member or a friend. And it seems like everybody's got some kind of relationship that mental illness has impacted. So I feel like it not only empowers me to talk about it, but it empowers other people to share their story and help their loved ones if needed.
Yeah, that's exactly it, and you're not alone, and I think a lot of times anticipating what people's reactions are going to be. And I think a lot of that probably comes from the stigma associated with mental health that over years, that has developed, and still, I don't think it's as bad today as it used to be, but I mean, that's what deters people. But it's cool to hear how, for you to say, like, people didn't run away when I said something. And at the same time, what it does for you as well, I think is important. That kind of empowers you and gives you confidence in being able to speak about it.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So when did you first realize from a mental health standpoint that, like, maybe something isn't what it should be?
Well, I come from a family where people have a history of mental illness and challenges, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, addictions and dysfunctions. So I've always been acutely aware of my mental state. And I've struggled over the years. I've had counseling, been on medications, but it was only in recent years where I became unable to function in daily life. I had an extreme depressive episode that involved a lot of crying, a lot of horizontal bed lying. And I mean, I went to work and that was it. And I really could not continue on. So that's when I got diagnosed with bipolar 2. And so I'm 50 something.
Yeah.
And it was just later in life that I realized what that was. And then kind of everything else made sense.
Wow. So just recently that was able to, and so, well, first of all, let me also say right off the bat too, communications director, right? So you can have a mental health issue or a mental illness and still be successful. Yes, right?
Right.
That's, so sometimes our public thinks like, oh, they have a mental illness, are they okay? Can they function?
Right.
And and like you said earlier, so many people are dealing with something. Everybody's dealing with something. So first off the bat, I just love pointing that out. It's like people are very successful and they have a mental illness, just as people are very successful and they have a physical health issue as well too. So you mentioned, some of those symptoms, right? So you've realized there's been some highs and lows. Are you more of a low?
Yes. Well, I'm more of a low, and that's par for the course with bipolar 2. It's got more lows than highs. I think people are more familiar with bipolar 1. They don't know it's bipolar 1, but you talk about the media and what you see in the entertainment industry where people are very extreme. And people do have that where their behavior is excessive and risky, maybe gambling or excessive shopping, things that really deter their life and harm their family's life and their relationships. For bipolar 2, my mania is a hypomania where, it actually looks good on the surface. I'm energetic. I'm going to take on 3 jobs. I'm going to overproduce. I'm going to exercise a lot. I'm going to clean the house at 2 a.m. And it looks like you're doing great and you feel great. But that's the lie bipolar disorder will tell you, both when you're hyper and depressed. It also comes with kind of a charged feeling where there's a lot of anger. A lot of times I'd go on a tirade or, burst out, and that's common with it as well. So for all the quote unquote good, I would say I felt with it, there was always an edge that just wasn't settled. So, and that part becomes damaging to people you love and in your relationships because you're going off and they can't but help take it personally. So it's tough.
So for the person, like you said, that's going off, right? You don't want to go off.
No.
on that person or the thing that happened, right? You're not wanting to do that. That's not, and so people are like, well, isn't that a choice? You're choosing to act that way.
Right.
But when you dive into even the science behind it and the cognitive, reasons behind that, it's not that easy to control.
No, it's really, it's a compulsive feeling, and you feel like you just have to release it. And somebody might happen to be standing there when you have that feeling. And you also do it to yourself. It's not just something you do to other people. You can feel that same anger about your own behavior, your life, and internally or externally express that personally. So,
What about the lows? Because I think sometimes, like you mentioned, like, you're able to go to work, but outside of that, you're laying down, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people are like, get up, start moving around, just make yourself do that.
oh, just exercise and get some fresh air. It'll
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Well, gravity seems to take on extra force when you're depressed. I mean, it's very intense, and it's only in the past few years that I've really had extreme depression where I felt like I was close to not being able to continue functioning normally. But start off the day crying on the way to work, somehow making it through work because I felt my only value was bringing home a paycheck. That was it. That's all I was contributing. So I really felt a strong desire to get there. Otherwise, I don't know how I would have made it. Come home, more crying, more lying down. No showering. Something about showering when you're depressed, it's very difficult. It takes a lot of energy. I think it's very vulnerable. I mean, you're naked, right? And all you want to do is wrap up like a burrito. And it just takes a lot of effort. That just is the most simple thing. But
That's interesting how you describe that. I think it's very important, if you're listening out there, to realize that, like you said, that's how much energy that would take, and then that vulnerability where, like you said, like you just want to be wrapped in a blanket, underneath a blanket, stuff on top of you, and you're doing the opposite, bathing.
doing the opposite.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah,
Hard.
it's a challenge. So then, I mean, how can you feel about yourself when you can't do the most basic of things that many people thoroughly enjoy, right? So everything becomes a struggle. And a lot of these negative thoughts, they seem like revelations, both when hypomania and depression. It seems like I didn't realize this about myself all this time. What was wrong with me? Now, if I'm doing great, oh, I'm excellent. If I'm doing bad, I didn't realize I was such a drain on society and my family, and I'm just a total loser. But it feels so real and true that it's very hard for somebody else to tell you that it's not.
Because that's your perception, just as for you to go up and, for someone that is a priest, you go up to a priest and say, hey, I need you to stop believing in God, okay? And I need you to go ahead and stop doing that right now. It's like you're going against everything this person stands for and chosen their life around. And they're just, no, that's not the way it is. And for you, for someone dealing with that, right, it's the same concept. We're trying to just sell you on like, hey, just get up. Come on over here and sit with me. But in reality, it's like the complete opposite of what you need.
It's very isolating. Even if you're around people and people who love you, you're still isolated, even if you're present and, with them.
So what was, you mentioned, the last few years where you felt more of it, more of the magnitude and severity of it. What prompted you to say, okay, go see somebody, go get some help, start a medication, something along that?
Well, I mean, I knew I needed help, but at the time, I really couldn't even go about getting it. So my husband helped me. He knew a doctor and got me an appointment. And that's how my recent bout started and how I became diagnosed. And I did go on medication, and it's not always, it's not a magic pill where all of a sudden you start taking a pill and that's the right one and that's the right dose and everything changes right away. But it's a long haul, but it's certainly valuable, and it has saved my life in many ways.
Yeah, very much a process.
Yeah.
Medication by itself is a process. And that's, I think, important that you said too, that it may not be the right one at first. You know,
Right.
there's a range of different medications that, you know, a psychiatrist or a doctor might look at to say, okay, let's try this one, you know, and it may not work. So, you know, if you're out there listening and you've tried something, it didn't work, it doesn't mean give up on it.
It doesn't mean give up on it.
Yeah.
And if it is working, it also doesn't mean give up on it, because sometimes I hear people on medication say, well, I'm feeling fine now, I'm not taking it. Well, it's not like you had a sore throat and you took an antibiotic and it's over. You're feeling good because you're taking it. But, you know, that can trick you sometimes. So I say
Yeah.
consistency is the key there.
And acceptance, maybe acceptance, like, you know, I have bipolar too, and this medication helps me. So I'm going to take it every day. Almost the same concept of I have high blood pressure, and
Exactly.
this medication is supposed to keep that in check. I need to take that every day.
Right.
You know, but yet sometimes we think two different ways about those things,
Right.
which is hard for general population in that sense to sometimes understand. You know, you mentioned your husband, right? Kind of that support network, finding a doctor or, you know, getting you to the doctor. How important is that from your point of view, having at least one person, right? One
Yep.
person engaged with you. And then, so one, the importance of that, but then two, how do you manage that? And what do you need from a person, a caretaker or that support system?
Well, it's extremely important because you know that you're loved and valued. Because, especially for me, and I'm sure other people are like this, I'll value myself on what I do. And when I can't do that, or I'm not doing it the way I think I should be, I feel like maybe I don't deserve support. So to have somebody consistently there through it all is just really important for me and for how I see myself. What I want from a caregiver, it's a challenge because the caregiver wants to help you and fix you and say the right thing and do the right thing. But you're having an internal struggle. There is no right thing, or well, maybe there's a wrong thing. But
could be.
There could be. But so what they want to offer is not necessarily what is reality, but just to have the presence there. And there are times like I said, if I'm lying in bed every second that I'm home, I'm not doing the dishes, I'm not driving the kids anywhere, I'm not mopping the floor. So just the understanding that you don't want this, you don't want to not participate in family life and in the relationship. You're just really unable right then. And, you know, and it's hard not to take things personally, like talking about getting angry and yelling, you know, on the other end. It's very difficult not to take it personally. But if the caregiver's done some research and read a bit about whatever disorder it is you may have, they can have more patience and a little more understanding. And, you know, some bells might go off. Wait a minute, this isn't about me. So that helps.
Yes. So patience and understanding.
Yeah.
You know, and really, I mean, such a, you know, I'm a big believer in knowing thyself, right? And then you're always just kind of on this journey, right, of self-discovery and who you are and all that. But it's like, you know, caring for somebody that is struggling, you learn a lot for yourself
You
from
sure
that caretaker,
do.
right? I mean,
Right.
that person is discovering the ability to say, like, this isn't about me, you know, and I care about that person, I love that person, but it's not about me. And so, I mean, it's even a growth experience for that person
them.
as well, too, you know. You mentioned value, that, you know, that we all want to feel valued, and, you know, and sometimes if we're not doing the stuff that we normally do to feel valued, and then it's got to be a lot of self-talk that goes on, I imagine.
The
you know.
ruminating self-talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, how do you, you know, I guess what are some things do you say to yourself when you start feeling that level of doubt about yourself or doubt about value? Like, and what would you suggest to others, you know, to be able to say to themselves to help at that moment?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I was diagnosed, I had mixed feelings. You know, one way it's a relief. It explains a lot of things. And in another way, I'm questioning my whole life and every decision I made, right? Who made it, me or bipolar me? You know? So I really had to stop looking at myself based on the doing and more on the being. So today, I accept the diagnosis and what I can handle. And it's less than what I used to be able to handle, but that's okay. So finding your spot where you can manage your life really helps you stay in balance. And I feel like I don't have to do everything, because I went through that period where I didn't do everything, right? I couldn't. And it turned out everything still went on, and it was okay. So it's the weight of the world is, not on me.
Yeah, that's some really good growth to take away from that, that you don't have to do everything and everything still can turn out okay.
Right.
Right. You mentioned, well, let me go back. So, like diagnosis, right? A lot of people hate that word because like and I'm very careful about that too, because those are labels, right? And sometimes people have put labels on people and they put them in a box, right? So how hard is it, or I guess when you found out, like, hey, this is we call this bipolar 2, these are the symptoms you're having, this is what we think you might be experiencing. Was that hard to walk through that, like, oh, this is a bipolar 2 diagnosis, I have bipolar 2? Was there that kind of...
Yeah, well, there's a relief factor.
Relief.
Somebody understands me, then I'm reading about it. It sounds like me. Other people have it. There's medication. It gives you a framework to go from. But for me and my identity, a stronger example is that I had to be hospitalized for a few days when I had another bout of depression. And in my mind, I became the person who went to the mental hospital. That was it. I was now going to be defined by the person who went to the mental hospital. And it really helped me. I mean, it turned things around. I can't say I want to go there again, but if I had to, would I? Yes, from this state. But it was very hard to get over that stigma in my mind, that how I must have been so low that I needed to do that. And I'm talking, a year and a half. It took me to not feel like introducing myself to people as, hi, I'm the person who just, I went to the mental hospital. I mean, it became just the focus of who I was. So it's hard not to make it your identity once you've been told that you have something. But again, the more time goes on and the more I realize people didn't run away, things were still happening, my life is still rich, I'm still successful at work, it starts becoming less and less of my main issue. But
yeah, so you kind of,
it was hard.
So it takes time, it's a process, but you also kind of, spun it to more of a positive way of looking at it too, like it helps me, and to understand that, to be aware of that. And I, that, like the diagnosis part, to be refreshed in some sense, a sense of like, I'm not alone, and I've heard that a lot, over time. It's like people realize, wait a minute, other people feel this way. This isn't just me. And that's like so impactful, it seems, for people.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody out there that may be thinking, my mental health overall just doesn't feel good. I'm not experiencing life the way I want to. I'm having these bouts maybe of really sadness and depression, or the opposite, right? That manic stage. What advice would you and courage would you give to people to say, you can get the courage to go get help? Like what do you think you could say?
Well, first of all, telling someone you don't have to call the doctor immediately. Tell somebody that you're close to how you're feeling. It'll help you articulate it, and you can get some feedback, hopefully positive, right?
Yes.
I mean, it probably will be. But reaching out for help can be difficult. I mean, it could be you look up 3 phone numbers and you just carry them around in your purse for 2 weeks. Maybe you didn't call right away. But when you do call a doctor or a therapist, it really will make an impact, especially therapy. Who can't use somebody to talk to about
Oh my
their life?
gosh. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's the
Everybody.
best. And they have to listen to you, right, for the whole hour.
Yep. And they got to nod their head
They
and
gotta
make
nod their
eye
head.
contact. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So it's great. But it's good to have another perspective, again, because these disorders are such liars. They're such liars. They tell us inaccurate information about ourselves and how we see the world. So to have somebody who can see that and knows how to break through that really is life changing. So just to get another perspective, family and friends are great, but they're kind of in it too. They're in it with you. So an outside perspective is always helpful.
A third-party objective listener.
Third-party objective listener.
You could find at stlouiscounseling.org if you wanted to, right?
Imagine that.
Yeah, look at that. It's commercial.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's interesting too. Like you said, one, find someone first just to tell. Someone you trust, someone that you feel comfortable with. I like that idea about if you're not ready, at least find three, put it in your purse or wallet. Or
your man
like
purse,
a satchel,
whichever
man
way.
purse. I
Yeah.
thought there was a cooler name for
Yeah.
it. I used to call it weapons bag. But that's another story. But yeah, I mean, to be able to have that ready to roll when it's time too, to work your way to that.
Yeah.
Because it is a struggle. So let's talk about counseling a minute. So
Okay.
like you said, it's who can't use that. So, from your perspective, right? Someone who's gone to a therapist, counselor, what's it like when you walk in there first, when you're first meeting the person?
The first visit is tough because you feel like you know all this information about yourself, your whole history, what you had for breakfast today and 20 years ago. And how are you going to get all this information downloaded like the Matrix into this person's brain so they can help you? And it turns out, that's a lot of overwhelming thinking. It's just a conversation. You're going to start off with, let them do the lead. They know what to ask you. And somehow you'll know what to say when you're there. Whatever you say was the right thing for the time. And then it'll be a relationship that will develop. So it can be challenging to think about that first visit. But
yeah. No, that's a great way of describing it too. And the process that people go through. Because, you're like, I got to tell them everything. And then it's like, and then how are they? Yeah, but like conversation.
Right.
And it's true. We'll ask questions, because we can just come in and you can just sit down and, it's not, and it's also, I mean, there's definitely dynamics out there that are still, lay down on the couch, close your eyes and all that, but it's not that. I mean, it's really just coming into an office, sitting down.
Right.
It can be as simple as that and
Yep.
talking. So, yeah, I mean, because I think a lot of times that's the other side of it is people are afraid because of the unknown. And, what we see about counseling is on TV or the media, and usually it's like, lay down and tell me about, talk about your mom and what your mom
Right.
did to you. And you're like, I don't talk about my mom because we're private, So and it's not like that. So we have to know what it's really like going into an
Right.
office.
And throughout the process, I've been going for many years, and I love my therapist. Some days, maybe you don't have that much to say. And that's okay. That's a good day, actually. If you just want to talk about the movie you saw last week. But there'll be other times when you may not even recognize that something is changing or shifting in you, but they can, and then direct you with, to realizing that in yourself.
So those cognitive interventions that can be instilled, and that's the other side, working on yourself, and even if you have a diagnosis, if you don't have a diagnosis, it's understanding yourself, understanding different symptoms you may be showing or displaying that may be impacting your life, and then making change with that,
Right.
and being open to that.
Right.
Awesome. Wow. Covered a lot.
We have.
Yeah. This is good stuff. What else do you want to talk about? You want to talk about Jersey? I think, I think some of the most valuable things you said today was about the value we put on ourselves and how those disorders, right, are big liars. I think that's how you phrased it. And that negative self-talk that overtakes our world. So I guess from that standpoint, that's why I'm hoping somebody can take away today as well too, is like knowing you are of value. And even in those moments when you are most down, there's still value to you. And then also, I think what you said about caretakers too, patience and understanding is pretty important. Not taking it personal. Because I think that's, yeah, you mentioned early on, it's like, the relationships and how damaging sometimes a mental illness can be to those relationships. And like, if you're lashing out, and I think that's so important to hear. If someone is lashing out, we just can't automatically say, man, they're a bad person. They're just mean,
Right.
And there's a lot of other words people can attach to that, right? And the reality is, you don't want to be mean.
No.
You don't want to just lay in bed all day long. People do not choose that, I'm also come from the standpoint of like, I don't think people are born inherently bad,
I think this experience for me has, in all things, I no longer label things bad and good. Things are gray. People, circumstances, and that's changed my perspective.
Awesome. Well, we have been here with Jenny Beatrice, and she has been sharing her story just about life, some of the ups and downs, bipolar 2, and just some really great interventions we heard today, and just from your story. So first of all, thank you. Well, lastly, I guess I should say, first of all, it was a long time ago. Lastly, just thank you so much for sharing, because when you were the words you said helped describe that diagnosis, I think, really good. And that helps others understand that. Maybe they're experiencing it, but also the people that have somebody they care about that's experiencing it. So that's a huge impact. So thank you for that.
Good.
So
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
all right. Well, this has been Tom Duff with Mental Health Matters. Hopefully you are still listening. And if you're still listening, that means you should go ahead and give on Giving Tuesday to St. Louis Counseling. Go ahead and look us up at stlouiscounseling.org. And until next time, Tom Duff, Mental Health Matters.
This has been Mental Health Matters with Tom Duff of St. Louis Counseling Services. Check out stlouiscounseling.org for more information.